Welcome back. We'll go on now, and for this week, the chapter in the book that you should read and the quiz will cover is chapter 7. Well, if you've been looking at chapter 7, if you've gone ahead, you know that I've actually started covering some of the material there. Most of my lectures last week actually started on chapter 7. But as I explained to you, I'm spending at least 2 weeks on that chapter because it's so important. It deals with the Constitution, and I think that that's a really important topic, and that's something that I really want you to get some good understanding of as a result of taking this class. So, we're talking today about that, and we'll go on with where I was last week. And what I was telling you last week was that under the Articles of Confederation, mostly in the 1780s, starting in 1781, things were not going well for the United States. We did get a good treaty, and Congress did a good job of dealing with the land in the West that it acquired from Virginia. So those are pluses. But everything else is a minus. The economy was in terrible shape. States are engaged in sort of game playing against each other. They're all trying to hurt their neighbors in order to benefit themselves, and the way they think they can benefit themselves is by hurting everybody else, which doesn't work. All that does is hurts everybody. And Congress was unable to pay its debts. Congress had borrowed a lot of money during the war, and they can't repay it. They can't pay interest. Every year they just sort of roll the interest over. They just say, well, the interest this year we won't pay it. We'll just add it to the principal. And if you know anything about the math of compound interest, you know that's a way to get in a hole deeper and deeper in a hurry. So things are bad. And a key to the problem was, well, there are two keys. One, Congress could not regulate trade among the states. Each state regulated its own trade, and each used their trade regulations as kind of a weapon against the other states. And the other problem was that Congress could not tax. So it can't get money. It can ask states for money, and it did that regularly, but states could and did ignore the request. So Congress doesn't have any money, can't really do anything. Now, one area where Congress did have authority, it has power over foreign relations. Congress was responsible for the conduct of all our relationships with other countries. Congress appointed our ambassadors to other countries. It gave them their directions. It was able to negotiate treaties with other countries. That was the responsibility of Congress. But ironically, that was another area where the country was in bad shape. We had very unsatisfactory relations, unsatisfactory for us, with other countries, especially the three main monarchies of Europe: France, Spain, and Britain. Let me look at each one and tell you what's going on there. With Britain, Britain signed a treaty that was very favorable to us, and they gave us all of that land in the West. But they had forts out there. They had soldiers out there, which they'd had all during the war, and they kept them there. There are British troops stationed on American soil, and they're supposed to go. They're not supposed to be there, but they stayed, and we had no way to get them out. We could threaten to send our big army out against them, but the British, of course, know that we don't have a big army, and the reason we don't have a big army is because we can't afford it, because we don't have any money. So any threats we make against England to do something bad to them if they don't get their troops off of our land, they're empty. And Britain knows it. In addition to that, for many years, a real big issue between us and Britain was trade with the West Indies. That was a big area where we did a lot of our trade. The West Indies got most of their food supplies, a lot of the other stuff they needed, from us. They focused on producing sugar, and they'd pay us for the stuff that we would give them, but we had a lot of trade there. And that was sort of a point of conflict between us and Britain, because the English government wanted us, one way or another, to trade only with the British West Indies. There are islands in the West Indies that are colonies of England, and supposedly we're supposed to trade with them and not with the others, but we wanted to trade with the others. We had very profitable trade with the Spanish islands in the West Indies, the biggest one of which is Cuba. We had very profitable trade with the French West Indies, the biggest one of which is Haiti. And then we had trade with the Dutch and the Swedes and the Danes and small islands, and we had a lot of trade there with the British, with the West Indies. And that was always something that led to problems. And then, as you remember, when England for many years had the Molasses Act on the book, which prohibited trade with the foreign West Indies, and they didn't enforce it, but then when they tried to, and during the war of the 7 Years' War, when England tried to really stop our trade with the foreign West Indies, that's one of the issues that led to the revolution. That's when they passed their laws to set up the Admiralty Court and everything like that, if you remember from back then. So this has been a contentious issue. Well, now we're independent. We can trade legally with all the foreign West Indies, which is a great benefit for us. Now we don't have to worry about, if we're going to trade with Cuba, we used to have to smuggle, and we could do that easily enough for a lot of time. Now we don't have to. It's legal to trade with Cuba. Well, it was legal for us, it wasn't legal for them. Spain had laws preventing Cuba from trading with other people, but the Cubans also ignored those laws, just like we ignored the laws. But now we don't have to worry about laws. So we have all this trade with the foreign West Indies that's now, from our standpoint at least, it's legal. That's great. That's a plus. And we probably increased our trade with the non-British West Indies. But ironically, we had also actually had a lot of trade with the British West Indies. One of the reasons that for many years England didn't try to enforce the Molasses Act was because we had so much trade with the English West Indies. It didn't matter. We couldn't get any more trade. It wouldn't do them any good to enforce the laws because we had so much trade with the British West Indies that they can't get any more. So that had always been a big plus for us. We'd always had all of that trade with the British West Indies, and that was legal. That was what we were supposed to do. And that was a great benefit to us, to be able to trade with places like Bermuda and Barbados, Jamaica, small islands of the British West Indies. That's a plus. And we got that because we were British subjects. It was legal for us to trade with the British West Indies. But we're no longer British subjects. And England says the only trade with our colonies can be with British subjects. You guys are out. And England was telling us now, you can't trade with our colonies in the West Indies. And they could enforce that law. So here we gained trade with the foreign West Indies, but we lost it with the British West Indies. And again, we tried to negotiate with England about that and say, hey, look, it's benefiting the British West Indies to trade with us. And you're hurting the British West Indies by not allowing them to trade with us. And England says, we don't care. Too bad. Goodbye. So we can't get anywhere with that one. And under the Articles, Congress could not negotiate favorable trade with the British West Indies. And we couldn't get the British troops off our land. So that's England. Then there's Spain. The issue with Spain is a pretty straightforward one. I have told you that we've got all of that land in the west. We've now figured out how we're going to settle it. We've set up the land ordinance to provide for the sale of land in the west. We've got the Northwest Ordinance on the books, or we're going to get it to set up a government for that territory in the west. But all of that activity, all of that settlement of western land depends on being able to use the river networks of that area in the west of the Appalachians, to be able to use those rivers to go down to the Ohio and there to the Mississippi and down the Mississippi and out at the port of New Orleans, which was Spanish territory. The Mississippi River for most of its length, was the boundary between the United States east of the river and Spanish territory, the former French territory, west of the Mississippi. Under international law, when a river is a boundary, the law is that both countries can use the river for trade. They both can have their barges or whatever going down those rivers. You don't have to stay on your side of the river. Technically, the boundary is down the middle of the river. But the law says you don't have to stay on your side of the river. You can just use the river, however it goes. So that was true for most of the river until it came very close to its end. And then for the last 50 miles or whatever it is, it was Spanish territory on both sides of the river. Spain still owned the area of west of the Mississippi, which is now along the coast of the Gulf of Mexico and over to Florida, which Spain had regained from England along the way. And Spain would not let us use New Orleans. And without New Orleans, all of our plans for the West, which has been a big deal. I mean, one of the reasons we went to war to England was to get that land, and we got the land, but it's no good unless we can use New Orleans. And Spain won't let us use New Orleans. So it's holding up our whole plan to settle the West. And we could negotiate with Spain. We did negotiate and say, hey, look, if you let us send our goods down the Mississippi and through the port of New Orleans, that's going to be a lot of trade in and out of the port of New Orleans. That's your port. You have merchants there. Those merchants are going to make a lot of money on that trade. It's very beneficial to you if you let us use the port of New Orleans. And the Spanish, like the English, said, we don't care. So what? They really didn't trust us. The Spanish were very suspicious, for good reason, of Americans. They think that Americans are land hungry, which we were, and that they might be, if they let us use New Orleans, the next thing you know, we're going to take it over. And they're also very suspicious of us because there was so much anti-Catholicism in the United States, and Spain is a Catholic country. And so they figured, well, those Americans, they don't like us, they're after us. And they wouldn't let us use the port. And then France. Now, France, remember, during the war, had been our official ally. They gave us a lot of money, they gave us a lot of weapons, they gave us troops. When we defeated the British Army in the Battle of Yorktown, about half the army that had surrounded the British was American, about half was French. And General Washington worked closely with French officers in planning strategy for the war. France recognized us as a nation. They signed a treaty with us. That was a big deal. France has been a very, very important ally to us during the war. Very helpful. But the war is over. Frankly, we don't need them anymore. And we didn't think they needed us. But they thought they did. France is involved in all kinds of European politics. This has nothing to do with us. I don't even understand very much about it. I'm not interested in European history. I only focus on American history. And all of the stuff that France is doing in Europe has to do with European history, intrigues, treaties, alliances, secret deals. There's all kinds of manipulation going on, all kinds of closed-door negotiations over secret treaties about parts of Europe and parts of Italy, which was not an independent country, but there's states there, and so there's some states are loyal to France and some are loyal to England, and they're all they're trying to maneuver and manipulate and get that. And France wants us to support them in all of these political dealings that they have throughout Europe, all of the diplomatic intrigues and secrets and everything like that. And frankly, That has nothing to do with us. We don't care about that. We don't want to back up France and their things. What do we care about whether France is allied with the Duchy of Milan or not? Who cares about that stuff? And we just want to trade with the whole Italian peninsula, some of which is independent, some of which is controlled by Austria, some of which is controlled by France. I don't know, who knows? And we don't get involved in that. We don't want to get involved in all of these political deals and manipulations and hostilities and intrigues. We just want to trade. We have been able to expand our trade to Italy and throughout the Mediterranean. We did that during the war. We want to keep that going. We want to get more trade there. We don't want to get involved in the political underlying things that are going on between France and who knows what. But France wants us to do that. And they are putting pressure on us to support them in all of their political deals. We don't want to support anybody. We just want to trade. We just want to be left alone and allowed to engage in trade so we can make money. That's all we care about. And France wants us to be allies of them as they had been allies of us. So we have bad relations with France because they're trying to get us to do something we don't want to do. So all of these foreign relations issues are not going well, and Congress is not able to deal with them. Again, bottom line is because they don't have any money, they can't afford to do anything, they can't afford to threaten anybody. So we're just in a bad shape. As I was starting to say at the end of the hour of the last lecture, there are a group of Americans who they're not in any formal organization. They're just mostly people that know each other. They're mostly businessmen. They're mostly fairly wealthy people. And they know each other. A lot of times they just know each other through business. They carry on trade with each other. They're involved in trade with one another, so they know each other. They're used to dealing with each other. They have ways to communicate with each other. They are longtime business partners or business colleagues, so they have networks of trade, of communication that they can stay in touch with one another. And through that, these networks, which are just it's just guys that know each other, they're communicating and they're complaining about how bad things are. And each person has got some sort of a grievance, and they're sharing, and let me tell you what's going on here, well, let me tell you what's going on here. And so they're doing all this stuff, and they're talking about the inadequacies of the articles. Now I'm going to give you a name for them, and it's a little bit premature to be really historically accurate. It's too early to start using this term, but just to make it easy so I can talk about them. Because they don't have any formal organization, they haven't made any kind of a deal or anything among themselves. But I'm just going to start calling them the Federalists. And I'm going to start referring to one of the leaders of this group. It's not really a group, but a person who will become a leader. I'll give you his name. That's Alexander Hamilton.